Do. Epsom salts, little green apples, chestnuts. Hi all, Crenshaw here with another story about Dogman from Nathan Tarantla. Thought I'd get me some fishing in first. I love fishing. We got great fishing up here on Whitehall Mountain. There's some big ones right in this little creek right here. Problem is, every once in a while, when I come up here, I forget to bring some bait. That's not so much of a problem, though, if you know a little trick or two. Finally, that should be enough bait. Well, I'm back. Got me a good mess of fish here. Well, that one looks a little funky, but he'll clean up real good here in a minute. Sometimes the fish up here get like that, ever since they put in that chemical plant. Heck, but it put 6 people to work, so I guess that's the price we pay, huh?
Bonjour.
You know, sometimes something is born that should not exist, but nature has ways of correcting its mistakes. That process is usually not very pleasant. Warning, this story contains violence and gore. Alrighty then, let's see the story Mr. Tarantla sent me to read this week. I started squirrel hunting in my teens. My daddy taught me how to hunt, and his daddy taught him. We'd go out all the time, my daddy and me, and sometimes the 3 of us, till my granddad couldn't walk. Then Dad had to take care of him. That family place burnt down, 30 years ago, I think, when some college kids attacked us. That was a bad year for college kid attacks. But I watch for 'em up here on Whitehall Mountain. I watch for 'em. I sure do. My dad taught me how to hunt. We'd go out with his friends, and sometimes my aunts and uncles. He'd carry a shotgun, and I'd carry my .22 rifle. Of course, being a kid, I had a real hard time staying quiet. That made stalking game difficult, and lots of times we didn't bag a thing. When my dad went alone or with Uncle Charlie, they came back with as many squirrels as they could carry. Dad said it was all about having the patience to be still and quiet. Charlie was my favorite uncle. He used to come by the house every month or so. He died of bone cancer a few years back, having spent most of his career soaked in grease and solvents in a machine shop. He didn't have any health insurance, and the company fired him as soon as he got sick. Anyway, one weekend he was over, and we cooked up some squirrel I'd shot the day before. So after dinner, Charlie and Dad kicked back with a few beers, as was the usual custom. I like these guys already. I loved hanging out in the room then, especially when they started talking about their adventures. Those stories were mostly safe for kids, but sometimes they strayed into raunchy or violent topics. It all depended on how much beer they drank, how late it was getting, whether or not my little sister or brother were around, and where my mom was. Sometimes they'd go late in the night, sitting in the backyard around a fire. Many Sunday mornings we'd find Uncle Charlie snoring on the couch or on the recliner in the screened-in back porch. I was 14 at the time. Uncle Charlie and Dad were going on about how there were more rabbits around when they were kids, and how every one they shot now was either skinny or sick. Maybe that's why we stuck to squirrels. I don't know. Don't they get sick too? At any rate, there was a moment of silence and my uncle burped loudly. I laughed. He looked at me kind of like he forgot I was in the room. I smiled and held up the book I was half reading while pretending not to be paying attention to them. "What you reading?" he said. I told him. "Hardy Boys, huh? I read them when I was a kid. Mysteries." I sighed and leaned back. Then he looked at my dad and said, "You ever tell him about the runt?" My dad chuckled. He shook his head and took a pull from his beer. The runt? No, dude. Uncle Charlie now had my full attention, and he knew it. He smiled. That was before Spivey's farm got turned into a subdivision. My dad scoffed. Here we go. No, shut up, Charlie grinned. He looked back at me and smiled. I'm telling you, it happened, kid. Your dad don't believe. Sometimes I think he's a little dull, you know? He laughed. Dad snorted. Hey, go get me a cold one, and I'll tell you a good one, Charlie said. I fetched a beer from the back of the fridge. Yeah, those are the cold ones. It happened at a place called Warriors Hill Woods, Uncle Charlie began, taking a sip from the bottle I gave him. So named because of a steep hill favored by local bikers as a place to have outdoor parties. I knew about the place. I'd heard the name Warriors Hill before. It was a stretch of grubby strip malls, gas stations, and half-developed lots that didn't mean anything to me. Well, back then, that place was all wilderness, my uncle went on. It stretched for miles between the cornfields. I was looking for deer or rabbit or whatever I could get. We weren't real particular back then, just wanted something for dinner. I carried a 12-gauge shotgun loaded with buckshot, which I figured was good enough for any targets that popped up. Bushes, ground cover, fallen limbs, and tangles of thick brush and weeds reduced visibility to less than 20 foot in most places. Cutting between the smaller hills that surrounded Warriors Peak, I came upon a coyote den. I checked out the hole, which was at the base of a low hill. Before I got close, I knew something was wrong. An odor came from the hole, not the musky odor of smelly coyotes like I expected, but of rotten meat. Decomposing flesh. Flies buzzed loudly in and out of the opening, and when I got close, I could almost feel a vibration in the earth from all their buzzing. Judging by the insect activity and the smell, I guessed there was nothing living there now except the bugs. Maybe they got poisoned, I figured. Maybe they got sick. Or, and this was the bothersome thought, something got in there and killed them. Maybe a wolverine or a badger or something like that. A very aggressive feral pig might do something like that. I got a little nervous. I didn't really want to run into any of those things. They could be downright dangerous. Anyway, I was glad I brought my 12-gauge with me and not the wimpy 16-gauge I usually took squirrel hunting. Stalking quietly through the brush, I went on for another hour before I came upon a low, tree-covered rise. There was an old oak tree there, and I sat on a rock with my back right up against the trunk of the tree. The land between the two hills fell away in front of me, where there was a little game trail. It was a good place to lay in wait, and after a time the sounds of nature gradually sprang up around me. It was warm. Grasshoppers chirped. Squirrels chattered in the distance. Sparrows, robins, and other songbirds were singing. About an hour passed, I guess, and I didn't see a darn thing. But I did start to hear something odd. There was this noise that didn't seem natural. At first it sounded like sputtering or wet popping. Then it sounded like moist wheezing. It came and went, barely audible, mixed in with the faint rustle of leaves. The breeze died for a moment, and in the lull before the leaves started rustling again and the grasshoppers turned it up to 11, the sound came back. It was like something or someone was crying. Until then, I'd ignored it. I figured it was one of those odd things like sap dripping or bubbling mud or debarked limbs rubbing against each other. I've heard wind whistling over branch tips that sounded like howling coyotes. So I figured it was something natural but unusual, something that could be explained. There's all sorts of weird sounds and stuff that happens in the forest when people aren't around, and it's usually not something to worry about. If you hunt for long, you'll see weird stuff too. You get used to it. Ain't that the truth? So I sat there, unmoving and silent, waiting for some kind of game to use that trail, and the strange sound came and went. The breeze died for a moment and it got quiet. I heard it real good this time, It sounded like a sobbing child. It couldn't be a kid, of course. A kid out here sobbing? It had to be something else making a noise that sounded like a kid sobbing. I craned my neck and looked all around as much as I could and didn't see anything. Then I heard this bark. It was low and muffled, and it came from somewhere behind me. With my palm over the safety to muffle the noise, I clicked it off. Something rustled in the leaves behind me, but it sounded like it came from some distance away, and I wasn't quite sure what direction. The breeze had died, so I knew the sound wasn't being caused by the wind. I knew the area pretty good. Behind me and to my left was a root-walled depression between two trees where wind and rain had dug a dish-shaped hollow as big as my Monte Carlo. As I peered around the tree in that direction, something moved in the underbrush. It wasn't clear, like the tip of an ear or tail peeking up at the lip of that depression, barely visible between the ferns. I honestly felt relief, knowing this wasn't some kind of runaway kid situation, which I'd started to think about. Now, whatever it was didn't deserve to suffer, so here I'm thinking I'm gonna do the right thing and put a hurt animal out of its misery. Probably just a sick coyote or a wounded fox. A lot of them get hit by cars and drag their broken bodies in the woods to die in peace. I got up as quietly as I could and stalked over to the depression. Looking down into the gloomy space between the trees, I couldn't believe my eyes. This thing was small, maybe 2 feet long. It had pink, slimy-looking skin, partially covered by dirty, moldy gray fur. There were scabby wounds and bite marks up and down its hide, which was stretched over a thin, emaciated frame. The bones just about pushed through its skin, it was so thin, and looked terribly delicate. I stared, trying to figure out exactly what it was. Gray skin covered its bottom half, which was like a dog. It had dog or puppy legs, but the upper half, the moist pink half, looked like a starving human child or toddler. Its front paws weren't really paws at all, but thin pink arms that ended in tiny, clutching hands, like the arms of a baby. Its face was in the dirt, and its head, the size and shape of a human baby head, was covered with a thatch of sparse gray hair, the skin underneath bruised and bleeding. It looked like death had arrived some time ago, but the thing moved. It wriggled and clawed at the dirt, pulling itself up the edge of the hollow at my feet. It sputtered and made that crying sound again, and my blood felt like it turned to ice. It reached up with one of those skinny pink arms and touched the toe of my boot. Then it turned its head up and stared at me with milky eyes in a face that looked like it had been beaten with a rock. But the damage didn't conceal the start of a snout-like muzzle or the little dagger teeth. I wanted to scream or run, but something stepped out from behind a tree at the opposite side of the depression, and the sight of it froze me in place. It stood on 2 legs, and I'm calling it a dog thing because it had a dog's head, and it had dog legs and a dog tail, but it wasn't no dog. From the waist up, it was more human than anything else, with a flat, broad chest covered with a mat of curly gray fur. It wasn't tall, maybe 4.5 feet, and it stood hunched over, which made it look smaller than it was. It stared at me, and I stared back. It balanced perfectly on those 2 feet, like it was natural to be standing like that. Its forelegs were more like arms, shorter than a man's and heavy with muscle. Instead of paws, it had fat hands with 3 fingers and a thumb-like extremity. This thumb was positioned a little further down the side of the palm than the thumb on a human hand, and it was on the opposite side, the outer edge of the hand. The thing scratched at the air toward me. It snarled. From behind another tree, a second creature appeared. Then a third rose from a depression or hole I didn't notice. Now I was thinking there was a whole pack of them, and I started to worry that I was being surrounded. A cry at my feet made me look down, just briefly, since I didn't want to lose sight of this thing by the tree. I felt like it was my eyes. The fact that I was looking at it so boldly and without fear was the only thing holding it back. Well, I looked down just long enough to see this thing climbing up my boots. One of those tiny hands was on my laces, pulling itself feebly forward and up. I stepped back out of reflex and probably said a swear word. My eyes darted back to the standing creatures almost immediately. They were unmoving, but had somehow come several feet closer in complete silence. Well, fuck this, I thought. Excuse my language. I had the shotgun in my hands, and it didn't take much effort to tilt the barrel toward the nearest critter and pull the trigger. It crumpled in a splash of blood and flesh, and the other two darted off before I could do the same to them. I kicked off that thing at my feet and ran. It really had a grip on my boot. Tangled brush and fallen limbs slowed me down, so I took to the hillsides, charging up and down until I thought my heart was going to burst out of my chest. Dripping sweat, I finally stumbled out of the tree line at Spivey's old orchard behind a row of mature pear and cherry trees. My legs were just about ready to give out. I fell to my knees and sat, my back to a tree, watching the woods, shotgun ready. Panting, I caught my breath. Little spots flashed in front of my eyes, and I thought I might have a stroke or a heart attack if I ran another yard. Sweat dripped in my eyes, and my hands and face were covered with stinging scratches and cuts from running through the brush. A moment passed and my breathing slowed. Nothing seemed to be happening. Then I heard this buzz and felt a terrible pain behind my ear. For the first time, I looked at the ground around me and saw the rotten fruit. Overripe pears were mushed on the ground all around me, rotten and covered with bugs. Yellow jackets were everywhere, and they were pissed off. I was so excited and concerned with something coming out of the woods that I didn't notice them. Well, I noticed now. One dive bombed my face and got me under the eye, and that seemed to be the signal that set them all after me. Swatting and swearing, I got up and half walked, half ran. It was as fast as I could manage. Out to the street and followed it back to my car. Uncle Charlie let the story hang there a moment, but I sensed there was something else. After carping back and forth with my dad, he looked at me. I don't know which was worse, those dog things or getting stung by those freaking yellow jackets. Man, they were everywhere, like I was in a nest. That's why I didn't stick around to grab it. He took a pull on his beer. I finally bit, able to stand it no longer. Grab what? Uncle Charlie looked at me. He licked his lips and kind of frowned. It must have got there when I kicked that thing off my boots. Anyway, as I sat there among all that rotten fruit, trying to catch my breath and wipe the sweat out of my eyes, I looked at my boots. There was something stuck to the laces. I thought it was a piece of dry grass or a leaf and pulled it off. Then I looked closer. He took another drink of his beer. My dad suppressed a giggle. Come on, I begged. Uncle Charlie took a deep breath and sighed. Maybe, I thought, he was too drunk to continue. He wasn't. Twisted up in my bootlace was a tiny pink hand, busted off at the wrist, he finally said. Dad made some kind of desultory sound and chuckled. I dropped it when the yellow jackets attacked. To tell the truth, it freaked me out. I didn't want to see it. I guess it scared me. At the moment, I just wanted to forget about those things. His face resumed the normal happy and not quite sober expression I was accustomed to. Guess I should have kept it, huh? Then maybe people would believe me. Then it was my bedtime, and boy, did I have weird dreams. A couple days later, I had a question from my dad about Uncle Charlie's story. As soon as I brought it up, he chuckled. Then he turned serious and said, Okay, what? Why did you call it the runt? I asked. Dad nodded. Well, remember when Peanut had kittens? Our cat had kittens a couple years back. They were cute, but we had a hard time getting rid of all of them. This created quite a lot of friction between my mom and Dad. We finally ended up keeping one. It had a tuxedo coat and was so tiny we didn't think it would live. We named it Chi-Chi, and sure enough it died after a couple months, after not growing hardly at all. Well, little Chi-Chi was the runt of the litter, Dad explained. This stuff just happens, son. There's usually a runt, a baby animal that didn't get as much nourishment as the others before it was born, so it come out small. A lot of times they're not just small, but real weak, and maybe there's something wrong inside. Well, people take care of sick animals all the time, and sometimes runts live, but it takes a lot of effort. You tried with Chi-Chi, right? Remember how hard it was? Sometimes they get better, sometimes they don't. But you tried, and that's what matters. You spent a lot of time with her, didn't you? Yeah. Well, you helped make sure she had a good life, even if it was short. Nothing was chasing her, biting her, hurting her, or giving her a hard time. She slept and ate, and, well, that's about it. And she was loved. Like I said, that's what really matters. But in nature, when a runt gets born, the mama doesn't always have food for all the babies. She has to make a decision. If there's a runt, that's the one that doesn't get food, attention, whatever. She stops caring for it. If it somehow manages to survive, the other babies, as they get bigger and stronger and more aggressive, they will often turn on the runt at some point. If they're carnivores, they'll probably eat it if the mother doesn't. Well, Charlie's thing in the woods, if you believe the story, was a runt, and he disturbed the litter as it was getting rid of nature's mistake. Uncle Charlie never lied to me. He never lied at all, as far as I could tell. Neither did my dad. The area where this supposedly happened is developed now, as the county and the Warriors Hill Woods is gone. And with it, I hope, are those creatures. Well, that was a very interesting story, wasn't it? There are all sorts of weird things that Mother Nature makes, right? But Mother Nature takes care of them all in the end. Thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe to this channel and hit the bell so you know when a new story appears. Help this channel grow by sharing links to my stories and pick up a copy of Dogman Bites, which includes the short story Squatchnado, available at Kobo, Google Play, and the iTunes Store, as well as Audible.com and Amazon. And be sure to watch the next episode of Dogman Bites.